In this short video, we're going to look at constructors in C#. Remember that constructors are one of the class method types. They are always executed when an object of whatever the class type is created. Constructors always have the same name as the class, and generally inside the constructor you'll initialize all of the data members or the class instance variables of that new object. Your default constructor is a constructor that has no parameters. A class can only have one default constructor, but a class also must have at least one constructor. Now, parameterized constructors are constructors that actually have parameters. So there will be variables that are needed in order to construct the object. A class can contain as many parameterized constructors as needed. The parameter list does have to be unique for each one so that the compiler does not run into an ambiguous situation and not be able to actually determine which constructor to use. A signature is simply the method name with its list of parameters. Now, when you declare or instantiate or construct an object, the computer uses one of the class's constructors to initialize that object's variables. If there's more than one constructor, again, the compiler will look at the parameter list. It looks for a match in the order, the data type, and the number of parameters. Again, your constructor has to have the same name as your class. The syntax for creating a default constructor is keyword public, and again that's the accessor so that you can actually create an object, and then whatever the class name is, again it has to be the exact same thing as your class, and then parentheses. Then you have the open curly brace and the closed curly brace. Inside will be where you want to initialize all of the class variables. So you should initialize any numeric variables to 0 or any string variables to ... or nothing. If there is something else that you want to set as the initial values, then this is where you would set them. So here's an example of a default constructor. We have public and then whatever the class name is, the parentheses, open curly, and then dbowoot, which is just a random variable name, equals 0.0 semi. So assuming that dbowoot is the class's variable, then I've initialized the variable and then close quotation mark. So if I created an instance of this object, then I would just say class name, my object name, equals new class name, and then it would automatically use the default constructor. Now below is an example of a parameterized constructor where I have double dbowoot set up as a parameter in this case. So if I have public and then class name, this value is going to come in from where I construct the object, and then it's going to be used to set the class variable. So it's always class equals local, because that value is coming in and then I'm using it to set. So it's always going to be the class instance variable is equal to whatever the local parameter is. And then of course my semicolon and my closing curly brace. So here's an example, public class game, and then I have private int score, private string name, and private bool turn. These are my class instance variables. I have a default constructor, public game, and I'm initializing score to 0, name to ... which is nothing, and turn to false. In the second one, I have a parameterized constructor where I am actually going to take all of the information for the score, the name, and the turn. So they would come in from wherever this was called. It would then load those values into S, N, and T, and they would in turn set the class variables that are up here and part of my class. I could have simply said public game private string, or sorry, not private, but public game string in, if I wanted to create another parameterized constructor where I only used one of the parameters. In that case, I might have something that said public game string in, and then name equals in, score equals 0, and turn equals false. You should try to set initial values for all of the private class variables, whether you are getting them in from the parameter list or not. That's it for constructors in C#.